Hey yo, all your researching people out there, those interested in researching the supply chain. This is O'Connor, and I'm in a local restaurant in Hong Kong. This is the perfect environment for doing research. Of course, you can research the community around you, but I'm talking about writing papers, rewriting papers, just thinking through what are you trying to say in your paper. So I just want to give you this background, and it's very noisy, so I have headphones, so I don't really care about that. It's a great environment. Anyway, I just want to show you a paper I just went through. I spent 2 hours this morning going through a paper. I was about to submit it, but I realised that no, I want to read through it again, make it really perfect. And so I've just made 40 more changes, like 40. So what are those changes like? So basically I've got a paper here where we're looking at the governance mechanisms and how they affect supplier responsiveness in aligning their own scorecard measures with the dictates of their major customer. Now this is set in the B2B supply chain of the electronics sector. So I interviewed over 1,000 suppliers. I supervised them personally over 1,000 interviews a few years back, and we've got this data. And we're looking at the suppliers' perceptions, and I was inspired by Bloom from Stanford and his study of over 3,000 managers around the world. Thought I would get into thousands myself, try and get some generalizability of the results, but we're actually focusing in terms of the industry focus. So we're focused on electronic supply chain, which is one of the largest supply chains in the world by value, and suppliers play a big part in this supply chain. We all know about the suppliers that supply to Apple and Samsung and all the smartphones that everyone's got in their hands these days. Okay, so let's have a look at this paper. We're looking at governance mechanisms, and what we mean by governance mechanisms, we're talking about transactional and relational mechanisms, how they interact to affect supplier responsiveness, and that's the basic model that we're looking at. And so that's the basic model here. So I think you can see that here. There's the basic model, and we're looking at transactional mechanisms, how it relates to supplier responsiveness, but how it is actually substituted by relational mechanisms, informal controls, which has been traditionally studied in literature, and how it's actually complementary, jointly influences responsiveness by the use of formal controls, which has not actually been combined with informal controls in the literature. So this is and then we're looking at supplier performance outcomes. So that's the basic model that we're looking at. And this is kind of a crossover between, I guess, the scorecard literature and the supplier development literature and the contracting and relational governance literature. So several literatures that we are crossing over and combining here, and that's the challenge of research these days. You have to speak to many different literatures. It's very hard just to stay in one discipline. It just takes much longer to write a paper, but when you do, it has much more credibility and value for future citations. So let's have a look at some of the changes I've made. I've made over 40 changes. So first of all, we want to put supplier responsiveness in the title because we're really talking about supplier responsiveness. That's a big area of the supplier development literature, and the work of Choi from Arizona University has done a lot of work in this area, and there's a lot of other people who've done work in this area too, including Krauss and a few others, Choi and Krauss, Dion, Hendrick. Lots of people have done work in that area. So we really focus on supplier responsiveness as kind of like the dependent variable. And then we're looking at governance mechanisms. So we're picking up the stuff of the POPO literature, the POPO literature, where are we? POPO, where they're actually comparing the contractual governance and relational governance effects of supplier opportunism and also supplier performance. So let's have a look at this paper. I've written this paper up, and then suddenly this morning I was about to submit it. I realised, no, I want to make more changes. And so there we are. Number one, we want to make very clear that the setting of our study is electronics industry, and I put that in early on in the introduction. The introduction is very hard to write. Number two, we want to really make clear what our theories are: transaction cost economics and resource-based theory. Number four, we want to talk about customer switching as an issue. Then, there's a typo here. We want to update the 2.4 trillion in trade 2012 to 2014 or 15, 16, more latest data that I can get. Supplier reliability, we want to update that, put that in there, make sure that when one of the big advantages of doing 1,000 interviews was that we actually duplicate some of the interviews, so therefore we can actually we could do reliability tests. We can actually retest various dimensions and get reliability scores of the second interview. And Nicholas Bloom and his colleagues, they did that for their large study, and so we thought, okay, let's do the same. All right, and so that's something interesting that not many researchers have done. So now we're moving into literature review. Number 9, we want to move that up to that paragraph. We might probably cut out this part here, probably move that paragraph up and then start a new paragraph here to be very clear. We move number 10, and we want to make the connection of this with the previous sentence. So instead of saying stated differently, we want to say in so doing, so it's a better connector. Then I've gone and rewritten this part here. I've added in extra stuff because we really want to make very clear that we're not only talking about the effect of governance mechanisms on supplier relationships, but we want to, the big contribution is, in the past they've looked at governance mechanisms and the relationship with supplier performance. We want to show the path by which supplier performance is improved, and what the big theme of our paper is that supplier performance is improved because suppliers are being more responsive, and we show that they're more responsive in terms of performance measurement and alignment. Hence, in the title, we've got supplier responsiveness. So we want to show the process by which performance is being generated. So then we've got number 13, 14, we're having more changes here, transactional mechanisms here. And then we've got 16, 17. Now we're starting to change some of the hypotheses, make it very clear. Then 18, how suppliers would about how suppliers. I just want to make very clear here. The font sizes, I had to correct that. I want to move that up to here because here, once we get the hypothesis 1, we've got two different opposing hypotheses. We've got a transaction hypothesis, transaction cost hypothesis, saying that, well, suppliers are faced with these governance mechanisms, so contracting mechanisms by an international customer or transaction-specific investments by the supplier. They would actually back off, actually being responsive and aligning their own system. Like that's an additional relation-specific asset that they have to do if you argue it that way. On the other hand, from a resource-based viewpoint, you would want to argue that suppliers will see the benefits of putting in an information system. We call the scorecard system or the performance measurement system a information system that enables the supplier to gain the benefits of information to help manage their transaction costs, transaction-specific investments, to help manage their explicit contracts that they're under with an international customer. So there's two opposing arguments here. Transaction cost theory will say that suppliers will not respond. Resource-based theories say that they will. So you could say that there's tension there and build up a study on that. But we just want to present both arguments, then explain why that we're going with a hypothesis that says that we expect a resource-based view. So we've got both arguments here, 1 and 2, then we say why we're going with the latter argument here, and then we've got hypothesis B to actually say that the supplier's response will be positive associated with transaction-specific investments. Then we get on to relation mechanisms in PMS alignment, and the special thing here is all about the informal relationship mechanisms, which we expect to substitute jointly with transactional mechanisms. So informal are things like supplier involvement, supplier experience, things that generate trust. The supplier gets to know the customer, the supplier gets the feeling that they're important to the customer's dialogue and communication, so therefore the supplier doesn't need that information system generate independently information about the customer. So therefore the benefits of having a separate control system to generate more information by aligning their PMS is not as critical. On the other hand, then we generate hypotheses 4, then we go down across to here where we're going to formal relationship mechanisms. So we're talking about here where the customer specifically uses IT integration, monitoring, and also the customer concentration. So therefore the customer is actually economically has much more bargaining power. In these cases, the customer puts more risks on the supplier. In other words, the customer is actually monitoring the supplier. So if the supplier slips up in whatever action it does, the customer is going to find out very, very, very quickly. So the supplier has a greater incentive to actually have this independent system to make sure that it stays on track, that it stays on coordination track, so it doesn't slip up with the customer. And so hence we say that formal relationship mechanisms will positively and jointly impact with transactional mechanisms. So that's what we're doing with hypothesis 3. And then we, of course, we've got hypothesis 4 that if the supplier responds with performance measurement alignment, then we're going to get higher performance. And so there we've got to explain the method here, variable measurement. We've got lots of stuff about things we did for the 1000 interview, and then we've got the results and the various specifications to test H1, to test H2 and H3, and also to test H4. So then we've got to have something on sensitivity analysis. Again, this is 28th change I've made, 29th change, I'm talking about the results, I'm putting performance in here, 30th change, our 4th contribution to do with performance, and 31st change we're explaining a little bit more, and we're trying to finish by page 28, hopefully page 27, cut this back a bit. We don't want it too long, we want to make the reviewers focus on the key ideas of the performance. Now I showed you the theoretical model, that's a theoretical model here, you can see it, and we get results that support H1, H2 and H3 and H4, so really excited about that. By the way, because we did re-interview analysis of the suppliers, we're able to do a Spearman-Brown reliability test, and very few papers have done that. And so if the reliability test is greater than 0.2, that's upon face the evidence that what you have measured is quite reliable. And so we get more than 0.2 results for several of our variables, and that's what we've got here, Spearman-Brown reliability test here, and there's some of the measures here, and then we have to report that test. This is not done often in research, so we thought we'd do that as an added benefit. Generally in this research, people like to have a dyadic analysis, that is, they interview a supplier, interview the supplier. We did the other way. We looked at 1,000 suppliers, and then we looked at various ways of measuring data, so not to confound the results with common response bias. So for example, we used fixed rate measures. We asked suppliers for percentages of investment. We used Likert scales on minimal occasions like supplier involvement, monitoring, but then we measured financial performance with archival based measures. So this is very important in trying to have much more credibility in the measurement of the constructs in our analysis, and not just measure everything with survey. So there you have it, and then there's our results here. We're trying to look at, we've got our main effects model here, which is testing H1, and then we've got an interacting models testing H2, H3, and then we're putting in the performance tests, which will be H4. And then we have appendix where we did a pilot study of 6 large original equipment manufacturers. We want to, we've got a summary of hypotheses, that's very important. Provide a summary, it's very, very important for showing the reviewers what do your results really mean? And so are they supportive? Are they partially supportive? And just to make it very clear to the reviewers that where the results are strong, where they are weak, and that's very important. Also, we've got interview protocol and design. So Nicholas Bloom and Van Reenen, 2007, big study of 3,000 managers. We followed that to the letter in doing this study, and that makes us very special. We have an interviewer checklist. We have some of the protocols shown in Appendix B. Again, the interview position categories, sample distribution across component type. Remember, this is electronic components, not just any industry. Going into consumer electronics products, and then we have customer importance measured confirmatory factor analysis, number 1, number 2, panel C again, and then panel D, and then panel E, constructability testing measures, many tests. But what I want to emphasize is that our final variable importance, maybe supplier importance, we measured that with archival data, and that's very important. We don't want to have common response bias, that any question in reviewers' mind that we have common response. So there you have it, governance mechanisms in supply responsiveness in scorecard alignment in B2B customer-driven supply chain. So that's what we've done. There's a paper. I've taken you through some of the issues, and I'm in a cafe in Hong Kong, and I've just made 40 more changes to a paper before I submit it. So that's the job of a researcher, and this is something you need to do. You just need to iterate, but more importantly, you just need to read, and that's the hardest part of just refine your paper and make sure that it just is readable and it flows, and that reviewers will get some value out of reading it. And then they're in a better position to make a decision whether to accept or reject your paper. This is O'Connor from Hong Kong, actually in a cafe in Hong Kong. There we are, in a cafe, and this is where research is done. Catch you in the next video. Bye for now.